But of course, this is not the only source of inspiration for the school. Nelson Mandela himself often said that he is part of a whole line of great leaders from our own country, like Oliver Tambo, but also leaders from across the African continent, like Nkrumah, Nyerere, Samora Machel, Amilcar Cabral, and many others. So that's the context in which we should locate the leadership of Nelson Mandela. What we're trying to do in the school is really conceptualize and build an analytical framework to help young leaders, change agents, activists, to grapple with the realities of today. I know when I was young, things were a little bit simpler. It was a bit black and white. And today it's a bit more complex. But many young leaders in the post-democratic era find themselves in a very confounding space about how they should respond, how they should react. What are the pathways forward for young African leaders who want to bring about change? As we see it, we need leadership that is transformative. As you heard in the video, Carlos Lopez, who's one of our honorary professors, keeps telling us, we need leaders with the attributes that we have seen in Nelson Mandela, some of the values that we see missing in so many leaders today. But we also need leaders who will leave behind strong institutions, institutions that are resilient, criminal justice system, but also able to build a democratic developmental state that can deliver resources to the poorest of our people and build our economy so that we can live in a way in which Nelson Mandela would have intended us to. We also want leaders who can help us bridge the wide divides of race, of class, of reconciliation that needs to be done and build the social cohesion that, again, Nelson Mandela taught us a lot about. So that's what we're trying to do in the school. And we're so pleased, really, that Albie Sachs agreed to come to the school today and help us launch this series, this leadership series. It's a launch of a series. It's a launch of a discussion, a dialogue that we want to have with people like Albie Sachs, who are activists, intellectuals, academics, and in his case, a fighter for freedom, a writer of the Constitution, and a judge, and an artist, and many other things. So thank you so much, Albie, for joining us. A few words about Albie. Of course, he doesn't need much introduction, but I think just for the record, for those of you who may not know about him, I'm going to say just a few words. And of course, my own knowledge of him still needs a great deal of education. But I'll say a few things. I was amazed when I looked at his biography that at the age of 17, he was here at UCT. He was a second-year law student, and he was also a participant in the campaign on the defiance of unjust laws. Incredible, at the age of 17. And I don't know how you did it, Albie, but at the age of 21, you already became an advocate of the Cape Bar. So I had an illustrious career in law. At the age of 21, I only had a BA degree in law. I don't know how you did it. But in that time, he also was a participant in 1955 of the Congress of the People, where the Freedom Charter was written. So he was an activist and suffered many, many of the punishments that we know that they mete out to you in those days. And in South Africa, while he was here, he then had to go into exile in 1966. He went to the UK, and one of the few things we share, Albie, is you went to Sussex. So did I, much later. And he got a PhD in Sussex. And he then moved on to Mozambique in 1977, where he joined the Eduardo Mondlane University as a professor, and where I think you met Rob Davies and Ruth First and taught at the Eduardo Mondlane University. Also worked in the government of Mozambique, in the Justice Department, which was also incredible. But of course, one of the amazing things that we know when we look at Albie Sachs is that he suffered from the aggression of the apartheid regime at the time. They put a bomb in his car, which exploded, and on the 7th of April, 1988, he lost his right arm and lost sight of his left eye. And how did he respond? He wrote a book called The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter. That was his vengeance, but there was more. There was more, because when he returned in 1990, or just before his return, he had to write a paper for the ANC and for Oliver Tambo on a code of conduct for freedom fighters. And I recall reading that, where you said, we should not do unto them as they do unto us. We have to be different. We have to be the human beings we want to see in the future. And in the 1990s, he contributed with Kader Asmal to the first draft of the Bill of Rights, and then came to the University of the Western Cape. That's the second time I joined, because I was at the UWC for a few months in that period when you worked with Dalla Omar and others there, and helped to work on the draft of the Constitution, contributed to the ANC committee on the Constitution, the negotiations in CODESA, and then to the final Constitution, which we saw in 1996. He was also appointed in 1994 by Nelson Mandela to the first Constitutional Court as a judge, one of 11, and served there for 15 years. During that time, there were many landmark decisions. And I recall him writing about one of the great cases that the court had written on Mrs. Kruger, which spoke to the second generation rights, which Albie Sachs was known for, making really great pathways, great frontiers in the development of constitutions world over. The ability to speak not just of first generation, but second generation rights. He went on to write many books, over 10 that I counted, but I haven't counted all of them. And one of them that made a great impression on me was the book titled The Strange Alchemy Between Life and Law. Philosophical, but also inspirational, and a great contribution to jurisprudence and law. And of course, more recently, he written 2 books. The one that I had the pleasure of receiving is one by Oliver Tambo. It's a short book, worth reading, easy to read. And I think those who want copies can come to us and we'll make them available. And of course, the other, I think, big tome that he contributed to is a book by Andre Odendaal, Dear Comrade President, which is about the Constitution and its making. And I hope you talk a bit about that. He has honorary professorships from around the world, and his most recent award that he received is a Human Rights Award by the George Clooney and Amal Clooney Foundation, which is an award in whose name the Albie Award, human rights contributions will be made to great fighters all over the world fighting for democracy and human rights. So today, we asked him to talk a bit about the challenge that faces us today. We are trying in this country to reflect on 30 years of democracy. What are the gains we have made? And what are some of the weaknesses and the fragility that we've seen in our democratic institutions after 30 years? There's a lot of reflection going on in this country. And indeed, across the continent, we've seen a similar fragility of democratic institutions. So we'd like to talk a bit about the strengths and the weaknesses, the gains we've made in the last 30 years, but also the long distance we still have to cover. And how then, and that's the question I guess for many of the young people here, is how do you build the resilience? And I think many people would like your reflections, Albie, on how we build this here. And when we asked Albie to talk about this, he said, well, I'd like to talk about Nelson Mandela, the lawbreaker. And I think it's a very relevant topic because it is about agency and it's about what we, especially the young people of today, what can we do to take forward the struggle that Nelson Mandela and others have advanced to build our democracy to where it is. How do we take that forward? And do we need to break the law to do that? So I hand over to you, Albie Sachs. It's such a great pleasure and such a privilege to have you here today. We really want to listen to you, talk a little bit about your own reflections, and then we'll open the floor for questions and discussion.
I'm going to talk about Nelson Mandela, the lawbreaker. And then later down the line, I'm going to talk about Nelson Mandela, the constitution maker. And if I haven't spoken enough, my third talk is going to be Nelson Mandela, the president in court, functioning in democratic South Africa. So it won't be a few words, it'll be a lot of words. I don't have a huge amount to offer on where South Africa should go. I'm just another person with my own views, but strong views. But I have had a pretty rich life experience. And that's what I want to share. And I think it's traversing those years and specifically connecting up with Nelson Mandela and my relationship with him and what he meant and so on could be useful, providing information, but also showing the connections between his life as a lawbreaker, his life as a constitution maker, and his life as a president under that constitution. When we commemorated the centenary of the birth of Nelson Mandela, I've been invited to give a lot of talks in different places. And I developed an opening that never failed. I would say, can you remember where you were on the 6th of April, 1952? The only time a lot of hands went up was at the Literary Book Festival in Hermanus. I chose that date specifically. People don't even know today. It was a public holiday in South Africa. It was the public holiday. It was the centenary of the landing of Jan van Riebeeck in Cape Town and starting South Africa's history. And it was just a few years after the Afrikaner Nationalist Party had got power in the White Parliament and introduced the term apartheid. And the airplanes were flying overhead and the armored cars going through the streets. And there were about 200 of us in the Salt River Town Hall, working class area in Cape Town. And we were singing. Now you mentioned all my different attributes. You didn't include singing. And in a sense, this was the origin of my singing. And the songs in those days, it's 200 people, maybe 119. Black people of color, maybe 10 white people. And the songs were very sad. My boy, my boy, Africa. And then soprano would start and the bass would come in, and it was really beautiful. Senzenina, 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 senzenina. What have we done? It's still sung today. Senzenina. And suddenly it's Dr. Morocco, Dr. Daru, trading off the honey never happy. Volunteers obey the orders, be ready for the action now. Volunteers obey the orders. And I say to my friend, I want to volunteer. You can't. Why? Because you're white. We're fighting racism. It's a black struggle led by black people. But I let our leaders know. And 9 months later, after I'd written my second year law exams, I'm leading a group of 4 young white people into the General Post Office to sit on seats marked non-whites only. I see pictures of me, age 17. My boy! And he huge cops, I don't know who that. And some people remember their first kiss. I remember the first time I went to jail. That was the first time. And we take him to court. The magistrate looks, he sees there's a 17-year-old. He says there's a juvenile here. Is any parent of yours in the court? My mother stands up. I'm sending you home to your mother. I wanted to be the revolutionary leader of the Defiance campaign, and he sent me home to my mother. Now, what's this got to do with Nelson Mandela? Everything. I was volunteer 8,892, something like that. Volunteer number 1 was a certain Nelson Mandela. I'd never heard of him before that. We found out he was a lawyer, and I'm a law student. He's a qualified lawyer. There weren't many black lawyers. They could make some money. He had to carry a pass. He had to live in a township. He had called a location. He couldn't vote, but he could make some money. And now he's willing to sacrifice all that for the sake of his people. And I kind of think back, some years ago, there was a debate about, well, there were some good things that colonialism and apartheid did. And again, I would ask the audience, what was the one good thing apartheid did? And I see everybody astonished. And I say, it created anti-apartheid. That's the only good thing it did. And that's how I came to meet Nelson Mandela. He grew up in the Transkei, in a totally different environment, totally different background, culturally, linguistically, socially. I grew up in Cape Town. Parents had come as little children fleeing from pogroms in Lithuania, where every Easter the Cossacks would ride up from Russia and say, the Jews kill Christ, we're going to kill the Jews. This is what one of my uncles told me. And they would hide in the basement. They would rush into the forest. So they come to South Africa and became politically active and part of the struggle for freedom of information. Yeah, on my 6th birthday, I'm just checking the scene a little bit, see who is this guy and what capacity is he speaking here. My parents were separated. I get a card from my father, Albert, my son, may you grow up to be a soldier in the fight for liberation. This is really World War II. I think that's a bit heavy. It's a bit heavy for a 6-year-old, but that was the world that that's what happened. The next phase then of the Mandela story, attending the Congress of the People. No, before that, third-year law student, I'm in Johannesburg, our leaders were there, the Transvaal Indian Youth Congress was very dynamic. People like Ahmed Kathrada and Bonnie Desai, they are revolutionaries. And I would always visit the office of Mandela and Tambo. Just pay my respects to the only black law firm in South Africa then. And I would be received so beautifully. Ruth Mompati would come to the door and say that Mr. Mandela and Mr. Tambo, maybe Comrade Mandela, Comrade Tambo are very busy now. Maybe I'd have a cup of tea with one of them. How's the struggle in Cape Town? We always say the struggle going well in Cape Town. I mentioned that to young law students. Go to those law firms, you never know how those people will end up. Now, the fact is, I felt a strong identification with them. 1955, I'm one of the persons attending the Congress of the People to draft the Freedom Charter. People saying, you're denouncing apartheid, but what do you stand for? What do you believe in? And we had thousands of people in all over the country. This wasn't a lawyer's document, asking the people, what do you want? What does it mean to be free? How do you understand it? And then teams got together and they collected all the responses into 10 main claims, and the famous opening statement about South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Then it said in black and white, which was revolutionary at that time when the whites were control of everything. Mandela wasn't there, he was banned, he wasn't allowed to go there. But that didn't stop him from being put on trial for treason. December the 6th, I've actually just written my final law student exams. I heard that I've passed, I've now become an advocate, I want to sleep late. At 4 in the morning, my doorbell rings. To this day, the doorbell rings, and I just start sweating. I'm conditioned like those dogs, because it meant police raid. And they're searching and so on. And I remember the one cop even said, Mr. Sachs, he called me Mr. Sachs. Privileged when you're white, being raided at 4 in the morning, but you called Mr. All these books, you read them all. You didn't realize how naive it was, you know, that you could actually have a whole lot of books. He had a book which he read. So he kept telling me how lucky I was. And I realized that 156 people were being put on trial for treason. And I was part of, on the bench, you know, the reserves. It helped me in my practice because I was looking for officers, and Lionel Foreman, who was one of the accused, flown up to Johannesburg. His office is vacant. He had rubbishy old chairs because he knew he was going to go to jail. I took it over. I never changed those chairs. I knew I was going to go to jail. The treason trial starts. We stand by our leaders. They're locked up in the old fort now. Oliver Tambo starts a quiet as soon as he gets there. Albert Patuli is there. Helen Joseph is there with the white people. 156. And you saw the nation, 156 people on trial for treason. Why? Because we demanded equality, and the argument of the state was, if you don't have the vote, the only way you can get power is through revolution. You know, even in South African courts, that didn't wash. But an interesting thing happened during the trial. It was boring, boring, boring. They put in all the documents they found at Kliptown. Every piece of paper, including one that said soup with meat and soup without meat. That became the big joke, that they left nothing out. At one stage, the lawyers were asked by the accused to leave, to protest against some procedural aspect. So now there are 5 or 6 lawyers amongst the accused. Joe Slover was one, Robbie Orenstein, Jackie Orenstein, another, and a certain Nelson Mandela. And people notice, wow, this guy's smart. Woohoo! He would stand up in court, be the most beautifully dressed. He had an authority, a way of holding attention, composing his thought. And Helen Joseph, in her book, If This Be Treason, comments on how Mandela stood out, literally as a figure and figuratively. And I say this is the moment when Nelson Mandela became Nelson Mandela. He was just one of the middle-ranking people. Our leaders were Albert Lutuli and Behrens Malata, Yusuf Dadoo, a different generation. And now suddenly, Nelson Mandela, that special high quality. 1960. Shopful. It became huge for me. In fact, John is an advocate for Garvey. One of my senior counsel rushes up to another senior counsel, Harry, have you heard the natives are marching? Now, the lawyer who always spoke about Africans, but some of us, the natives are marching, and they're coming down Rowan Street. I went rushing out of my chambers. I was banned. I couldn't attend the march. I couldn't be close, but I watched, and it was, for me, my dream. The people were marching. People were marching. And the state of emergency is declared. Nelson Mandela burned his pass. Nelson Mandela goes underground. South Africa is now changing. And the leaders of the march are put on trial. BAC, now of course I've been ANC. But for some reason, the police lock up 3 ANC members. So no bail, no defense, no fine for the PAC, but the ANC want me to be the lawyer, and it ends up I'm the lawyer for everybody. And I'm cross-examining, and I put it to you, Sergeant so-and-so, and I sit down, and Philip Kosana gets up and says, Sergeant so-and-so, I put it to you. It's my phone. And then Lawrence Pagwebe gets up and he says, I put it to you. And Kelly Kapwegi gets up and says, I put it to you. And I asked them during a break, is there any way, any witnesses you want to call? They said, yes. Can you call Sobukwe? I said, sure. And I fly up to Joburg. I go to the Cinderella prison. There's a guy says, can he be my boy? Can he carry my bag? Now, I don't like anybody to carry my bag, and I certainly don't like a black person to be carrying my bag, you know, to look like my boy. But he wants to be my boy. Why? He wants to speak to Sobukwe. So I come in there, I give my name. This guy's just carrying my briefcase. He walks in, he's invisible. And he spoke to Sobukwe. And also, I don't know what they said. I didn't want to know what they said. But I mentioned this because Sobukwe was impressive. In short pants, that business with short pants. Thoughtful. If the accused would like him to be a witness, he'd be only too happy. And I think he appreciated the fact that I'd come and spoken to him and that I was fighting in the court alongside the people who were his followers. The ANC then took a crucial decision on leadership. Oliver Tambo would go outside the country to get international support for boycotts, pressures, mobilization. Mandela would stay inside the country for the resistance in terrorism. And he appeared and disappeared and appeared and disappeared. He was called the Black Pimpernel. Now, that sense, if you're all reading, as young boys used to read about the Scarlet Pimpernel, but it's out of fashion now. But there was something about him, his debonair style, a little bit flamboyant, proud, not somebody creeping around in disguise. Nelson Mandela. And 1961, there's a referendum, South Africa will become a republic, and Mandela calls together a conference, all in African conference, and the idea is we're not in favor of a monarchy, but we don't believe the status of South Africa can be changed except with the will of all the people. We call for a national convention. So the idea of negotiations is put on the agenda in 1961. And it's almost like a last challenge ball to the whites. And it's thrown into the waste paper basket. Dismissed completely, general strike is called. In fact, it was split after the lockdown. And more suppression. And Mandela appears, disappears. The story I learned just recently was that one way he would travel would be to pretend to be the chauffeur of white guys in the struggle who would pretend to be capitalists. And one of the chauffeurs we all knew was Cecil Williams, the play producer. Another was Dennis Clooney, an advocate who borrowed a car from Arthur Chaskerson to drive Mandela down. Just 2 weeks before Williams was driving, he was captured, and then the CIA were the ones who gave him away. Mandela in court. Now, this beautifully dapper, smartly dressed guy decides, I want to dress as an African man. And he gets also regalia, and he makes an extraordinary application in court to the magistrate. He says, Your Worship, what I'm going to say is no reflection on you as a person and the way you conduct your court. And he ended up by saying, in this country, it's the whites who make the laws, the whites who administer the laws and apply them to the black people. And even in this court, I feel I'm a black man in a white man's court. I should just be a human being in court. I ask you to recuse yourself to stand down. But it was phrased with such eloquence and forcefulness and style. It wasn't like that at all. He got the right register. I heard afterwards the prosecutor actually went to his officer of Fruits and Pride, that he is now prosecutor. It's a white guy. He mentioned him afterwards, was so moved by that speech. So it was knowing his terrain and using it in the most appropriate way to get the biggest impact, and then he disappears. He's brought back again now for the Rivonia trial. Now they've got more evidence, including a document, not sure it's called Operation My Boye, in his handwriting about revolution, insurrection, capture of this, that, and the other. He said, in fact, it was just vying out different ideas. Our friend Dennis Goldberg is amongst the accused, the one who worked on munitions. I was in the youth movement with him. Dennis was practical with his hands. He would look after the sound system for our parties as the lights went off. I was yak. He went into MK, 23 years prisoner. And it's well known, Mandela's speech from the dock. This is a special thing that South African procedure allows. If you're an accused person, you can keep completely silent and say nothing. You can testify as a witness, then you cross-examine. Or you can make a statement from the dock. You're not questioned, but you're just giving your explanation. That doesn't carry the same weight because it's not tested. He decides to use the statement from the dock to speak uninterrupted for a couple of hours. And it's a statement about his life, democracy in the rural areas, resolving disputes through discussion. It's not something new to us African people. And then the yearning for opportunities of doing things and the repression and the violation of rights, and ending up with this is why we had no other way of fighting. We believed in nonviolence. We spoke the language of nonviolence. We restrained our people for a decade and more. And ultimately, violence was the only way to bring about change. And he said, these are the ideals for which I have lived. And these are the ideals for which I'm prepared to die. And George Bezos said, Nelson, you're actually challenging the judge to sentence you to death. You want to say it needs be. And if you look at the text, you'll see written in, these are the ideals which, if need be, I'm prepared to die. And those are the last words heard from Nelson Mandela for 27 years. It was a criminal offense for anybody in South Africa to repeat his words, to show his photograph. And it makes sense. He became more powerful as the silence leader than if he smuggled little notes up the trail could have been. I was locked up in police cells in Cape Town. I wasn't on the island. But when I was in exile in Mozambique, I met Indus Knight, who had been 10 years on the. He told wonderful stories, Indus. I mean, Norwegian ambassador would buy some nice prawns and chicken and so on. And in industry got to report these stories. And I spent a couple of weeks, he's smoking away, I hate smoking, across the room, hot air, recording his stories. Such powerful stories. I remember one young person in After Democracy, that guy saying, "And what's so special about these prisoners? They did nothing." Didn't do nothing. They had to be up early in the morning, go to the quarry, break stones for hours and hours and hours, baking hot days, freezing cold winters. Willie could come and see him once every 6 months. And they fought on the island. How many people here know about the hunger strikes on Northern Ireland? Put up your hands, anybody, if you know. Part of history. The prisoners whose rations are meager to begin with, and even more meager, Kathrada would get bread. He would share his bread. He might even get butter, might even get eggs. He'd have long pants, African prisoners short pants. But it was hard. And not for a few days and a few months, and not just for a few years, for decades. Breaking stones, leading hunger strikes. Indus told me one story of at one stage they were lined up and one of the warders was beating up a common law prisoner and Mandela just lost it. He rushed over and grabbed this warder. Now that's high treason in prison. And they were going to prosecute him. A lawyer friend of mine got involved and they backed down because they knew Mandela would turn the tables. So he was fighting on Robben Island. We're far away. if there was one person who dearly loved Nelson Mandela more than anybody else, was Oliver Tambo. And Oliver Tambo even said afterwards, maybe he should have stayed on in South Africa and Mandela should have been sent out. He always mentioned Nelson Mandela, but he always said Mandela and other prisoners. But the idea was not just to speak about the South African prisoners on Robben Island, too abstract. So you take a figure and you personalize and you depict and you get some old photographs and people telling memories and so on to mobilize millions on your side to get the release of all the prisoners. In that sense, he wasn't our leader who was sent to jail. He was one of our leaders sent to jail, emerged with particular respect in jail, and now internationalized to represent the fighting spirit of the oppressed people of South Africa. I pick up some stories afterwards. My friend Wolfie Kovich, the one who said, "You can't take what." He used to say, there was a famous, when they had that huge free Nelson Mandela concert in London, there was a picture of Mandela. He said, "You know that keyhole at the back of the picture? That's my keyhole." He was hiding for 6 months in Berea, Yeovil, in Johannesburg. He couldn't hide in Soweto. There were informers everywhere. So he would hide there with Wolfie. And at that stage, that was when Wolfie was formed. And Wolfie had been in World War II. There were other white comrades who had, one who had been a mine worker in then Northern Rhodesia, knew about explosives. And Wolfie described the first bomb in South Africa, a test was in Wolfie's brother's brickfield. His brother had a brickworks, it was a Sunday, nobody working. And he said they put the bomb and they lit the fuse, whatever it is, they went back. And he said, when the explosion came, it was such a fright, they almost fell down. That was like the beginning of the first test. For now, a new phase of struggle. So this is Mandela, the lawbreaker. I want to add just a little bit about Oliver Tambo in relation with him. The chair mentioned the books I've written. The first was The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs. The second was called Stephanie on Trial. Stephanie, she was my first wife, client. She'd done pylons in the struggle. She was beaten up. I'm subjected to sleep deprivation, torture. It's all in that book. A sad book, but a book of hanging on at a time when the 50s were a genius decade. We were making progress, even although we were repressed. Things were moving forward. We were very confident. The 60s, a decade of terrible repression. And there it was just important just to hang on, hang in there. And that book, in a way, through two individuals, shows how we managed to just about hang in there. So Collins are publishing it, but they're publishing another book. And it's a book of the speeches of Nelson Mandela, and Oliver Tambo's written the foreword. And it's such a beautiful foreword, where he describes their office and he says, if we hadn't been involved in the freedom struggle before we became lawyers, when we heard the stories of the people driven off the land, insults to us, the lack of rights we would have become. And he said Mandela was popular with the youth because his impatience represented their impatience, and attractive to women. And it's almost like the two personalities, with Mandela flamboyant, outgoing, the boxer, I wouldn't say a show off, but not uncomfortable being noticed, to put it that way. And Tambo, much more reserved, about to become an Anglican minister in He took Mary Adelaide in December 1956 instead he's thrown into jail. But this is what he writes in the foreword. And I remember that Collins directed jumping up onto the table and salute to Nelson Mandela and the other political prisoners. It completely overshadowed my book. But I was so happy to be associated with that. How many of you have been to Constitution Hill? That's a fair number. And if you go down on the art tour, you will see engraved in one wall, these are the ideals for which I've lived. These are ideals which, if need be, I'm prepared to die. And opposite that are some tablets. The artist, what his name just slipping me.
Willem Bossel.
Willem Bossel, brilliant conceptual artist, brought this South African black marble stone, and he carved spokes, the number of days Nelson Mandela spent in prison, the number of days Dennis Goldberg, thousands and thousands, means 7,000 little spokes. And in that very simple, not triumphalist way, very simple, compact, very meaningful way, commemorates, celebrates as a South African patriot, honors the people who were locked up. So I've highlighted these points because Mandela wasn't our leader who went to jail and we waited for him to come out to resume the leadership. He emerged as part of the leadership core through his extraordinary qualities. And the experiences he had in the resistance of solidarity on Robben Island, of working together with others, of timing, of challenging, of choosing your battles, all became highly relevant in terms of how he conducted himself when it came to preparing for democracy, for negotiations, and afterwards for exercising power. Done?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's extraordinary. I think rich life really that you live. What a privilege! What a privilege! And a tragedy and a privilege and a life to celebrate. Your own life intertwined with the lives of Nelson Mandela, over time with many other people of struggle who fought for such a great revolution and built a constitution and a democracy. And that's extremely important part of the narrative about South Africa, because many of us were much younger and haven't lived that period, the early part. And some didn't even live the part of seeing Nelson Mandela in action in the post-1994 period. Those are our students. Those are the people who we have to answer to, because they need to carry forward that struggle. And they're curious, but they're also impatient. They're impatient. So what we want to do is maybe listen to your voices. And I encourage all of you who are impatient to ask some questions and maybe even offer your own reflections on what Albie Sachs has communicated to us.
Not exactly a question, it's just a comment or an appreciation, I can say. I was born in 1992, so I was still a baby, I know nothing. So studying history at school, the way that you talk about things just now, I realized I don't know nothing about history, and I didn't like history. It is the reason that I didn't even choose it on my grade 10. So when I was studying history, I knew that, okay, Nelson Mandela for 1994 did this thing, Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island, but we didn't know actually the way that you just put a picture for us. Because I was like, okay, I'm in this thing now, I'm listening, like I can hear someone who was there, and they're giving us the pictures of things that were never taught to us at school, things that are not on the books that we can actually read out. So I can tell you one thing, even the children that are studying now, the history is not something they're excited to learn about. It's very nice to hear you now listening to this history. I was actually awake, I was didn't listen to everything you were saying, but at school, oh, I'm gone because it's something you read, they read and you don't even understand what is going on. 1990 something, 1990 something, and then they give you a test. What happened in 1990 something, you don't know. But the way that you just pictured, put a picture for us, the pains that you went through, the struggles that you went through, you fought a lot. And to realize that I can see you now, you say you lost an arm, you lost an eye, and it's just amazing. I can say that it's amazing the things I can see, because these things you never see, you only see on movies. I don't like watch movies of struggles because they take you back, and then you end up having that hatred towards a person that you don't even know. So I don't like to watch those kind of movies. But the way that you just demonstrated everything for me now, I don't even have hatred against anybody. There's no feeling on me like, oh, I hate those people, what they will do. Because I can understand everything that you guys fought for peace. We didn't want to be the same people as they were. We want a new South Africa. So we don't have to return back like fire with fire. We don't have to fight fire with fire. Now I understand that. Thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you so much for the very wonderful reflections and for everything you have done in terms of bringing South Africa where it is today. I actually wanted to compel you a little bit on some of the remarks that Professor Faisal made earlier about the pathway forward for young African leaders. And particularly as someone who's experiencing South Africa today and its leadership challenges and the kind of realities that many people still continue to face. I think many young people are becoming despondent and feeling like their voices don't get to change situations or make a difference in the kind of overall movement towards equality. And so the kind of struggle for equality in South Africa, where it is today, some of your reflections on the current state of where we are and some nuggets of wisdom. I know you said you are but one person. You don't have the answers, but you have some strong opinions. So I would like to hear what some of those strong opinions are in terms of what young African leaders today can learn from your experiences and what they could do better going forward to advance the fight for equality.
I'm often asked.
Nice shoes, by the way.
That's like.
I'm asked to give advice, and I've got a tricksy answer. I say the only advice I'd give to young people today is not to accept the advice of old people. To be as challenging and independent and cheeky as we were. And I stand by that, but I think it's not enough. The thing that I think is transmissible is idealism and hope. And just to say that we were a wonderful movement, but terrible things happened in our movement. We weren't all wonderful people. We didn't only do wonderful things. one of my most important tasks. If I'm asked, what was your most important thing you did as a lawyer? Defense counsel for years, law professor for years, writing books for years, judge for years. I say the two most important legal documents I produced. One was a tiny piece of paper when I was in prison, which I smuggled out in a coffee flask about the sleep deprivation torture. And the other is the code of conduct. And I'm invited, it's great excitement. I'm working in the Ministry of Justice in Mozambique. And the phone rings and reception says, President Oliver Tambo is on the line for you. And I pick up and say, good morning, Comrade Albie. He says, how are you feeling? What's your health like? Political situation, Mozambique, African style. What's he on? What's he on? Eventually he says, a problem has arisen. We feel maybe you can help. If it's possible, could you fly from Maputo to Lusaka? I know your work is very important and it might be possible, but it might help. I can speak to President Savannah Michelle. And the ANC used to say, Comrade Albie, there's a conference in Greenland next Thursday, you must be there with a 30-page newspaper document. The president is saying, well, no, it's difficult. If you can't make it, I fully understand. Of course, you say to the president, take me. So 2 weeks later, I'm flying to Lusaka and drive down in his office. Office was low ceiling, half the size of this. And I noticed there were lots of flies, and he'd roll up newspaper and he's eating the flies. And I said, I feel the leader of the National Liberation Struggle in South Africa shouldn't be eating the flies. I think I really should. And then he asked after my health, and did I have a good journey? And what's it? And he said, we have a problem. We've locked up a number of captives, sent to destroy our organization. And there's nothing in the ANC statutes about what you do with captured enemy agents. And if I'm in England, I'll say there's nothing in the Labour Party statutes. What do you do with captured Tories or American captured Democrats? And I very confidently declare, well, the President, the international instruments that say no inhuman, degrading punishment or treatment, no torture. He says we use torture. Can't believe it. We're fighting for freedom, we use torture. And then afterwards, there have been reports from the camps of brutal treatment by captives, by young people. Young people left school, high school, university, gone to fight for freedom. Now they're in charge of captives. And all they know is if we captive, we're beaten up. That's what security does. So he says, Comrade Albie, can you prepare a document for the ANC? We have lots of other problems. We have problems of comrades who drive when they're drunk, problems who assault, problems of men attacking women, people stealing a little bit of money we've got. And the countries we live in say we have enough crime of our own, you deal with your own crime. So in the end, I wrote what was really a law of criminal procedure and a bill of rights for a liberation movement in exile, with different levels. In your branch, you settle things politically. More serious things, you have a tribunal. You have a right to know the evidence against you, to hear the witnesses, to question the witnesses, and then a range of punishments. Really serious offences against the whole organization, a very special tribunal. And I was asked at the Calgary conference in 1985 of the ANC to present the code of conduct. Tambo's position wasn't, I'm the president, I lay down the rules, you follow. For these things to work, the whole movement must be serious. And I remember two first people up on high stage were both from MK, Israel. And the one said, I said, the real question is, in circumstances of extreme emergency and necessity, can you use what's called extensive methods of interrogation? Everybody knew that was software saying torture. And this guy says, if you give security the tiniest leeway, they won't stop, no torture. And the next guy gets up and he says, we are fighting for life. How can we be against life? I felt so proud. And unanimously it was accepted, no torture. So already during the struggle, we're fighting for the themes that go into our Bill of Rights and our Constitution afterwards. So we had choices then. And you could say it's a liberation movement against the ruthless enemy, they beat us up. Maybe some comrades will suffer unnecessarily. Oliver Tambo said, no. If you're fighting for freedom, you've got to have freedom in your heart. And in the end, that proved to be stronger than anything. And it's that kind of message that you know, I feel is for all times in different contexts. There was something else I left out that gives me a chance to mention it. In Mozambique, a South African Pamela dos Santos, who was married to Marcelino dos Santos, the vice president there, she said, Albie, you know, Frelimo leaders want to know who is the top leader of the ANC. Is it Oliver Tambo or is it Nelson Mandela? Now, in Mozambique, there was never any question. It was Samora. So I'm working with Oliver Tambo on the statutes of the ANC, and I'll say, you know, I've just been asked this question, and what should I say? And straight away, he said, Nelson Mandela is the top leader. He's the commander-in-chief. Some years later, Mandela is out, he's in the soccer, and I put the same question to him, and straight away he says Oliver Tambo is the top leader. And it's important to make that point, because he wasn't like, in fact, he never equated himself with Fumata and Nyerere and the others as a kind of single leader. And on that particular occasion, when he came to Lusaka, we were so excited. We were so excited. I'm going to tell you a couple of little more stories. We're now meeting after 30 years. Comrades who we hadn't seen for more than 30 years. And we're waiting for them, and they come into the hall, and everybody's rushing up and hugging. Everybody gets a hug except me. Cape Town wasn't there. The only time I felt sorry for my own was that moment of reconnection. And then it was Raymond Schlaber came up almost like a little consolation afterwards. Any event, Mandela now is speaking to us for the first time. And he said, if you were to give me a knockkerry and a watchman's uniform and a chair and a brazier to burn at night and ask me to be the watchman of the ANC outside the ANC's office, I will accept. I don't think there was any chance that for all his physical strength that would happen, but he was making a point. I'm not coming out as the leader I expect you to follow. And he and Tambo had a huge respect for earlier leaders, especially people like Albert Sachs, but going back to the very first leaders of the ANC, feeling that they in that tradition, and each one had to carry things forward at a further stage. But just that personal story, 2 weeks later, I'm back in London, where my home still was then, and now the Mandelas are coming to London. And we're in a hotel, and some of the other group upstairs, and it's Winnie. She comes down the line, very buoyant, sees me, she gets a little shock. This is my Albie Sachs. Albie Sachs, she says, and she opens her arms and she gives me a huge snuggly kiss on I see. And I owed something to Winnie, you know, for that moment. It was like a little gesture, very wonderful gesture to me. I got very cross with her afterwards. It's suddenly ANC, but I fought for her for a long time, as long as I'm telling you these stories to indicate we weren't automatons in a movement, following orders and fighting over policy. Of course we did all those things, but we were human beings living our lives. And people have got to be human beings today. It's the second, if you like, homily that I should offer. To see, did you want to?
I did. I'll defer from this.
Okay, it's not a comment, it's just to add on to what my colleague was saying about the history of South Africa, because I was a historian when I was at school, and then I used to learn about Roosevelt, then Napoleon Bonaparte, that was those years. And then I still remember my cousin was when it was like democracy. I happened to meet Mr. Mandela when I was working at Cape Town Hotel when they were still busy with the negotiations. So I used to meet him because they were staying there. And I thought that by now the history of South Africa will be broader in schools. They would know what took place, what happened, and you know, and because I still remember when she was doing history in standard 5, they were asked who is the minister of this, who is the minister of this, who is the minister of this. I had to help her. I was working for the union, then moved from the hotel to the union, and also. As African South Africans, we don't read. We don't watch these other movies because I used to watch these Mississippi Risings and all that, where you get to know what took place, what happened, the struggles of the African Americans, Africans, and all that. I think we need to read more and know more. And then also, I think that taking history in a broader spectrum to schools will make the students to know about the history of South Africa.
Thank you, Albie. Beautiful presentation. Thank you. What's the question? You've been telling us about Mandela, the lawbreaker, and the circumstances under which Mandela decided to break the law, and the ways in which he broke the law and other people break the law. Do you think there are any circumstances in current society under our democracy where leaders can lead in breaking the law? I know many of us, for example, feel, and we were having a conversation meeting this morning, lots of people here from Google Letu. Nobody's listening. We try, we petition, we protest, nobody's listening. Are there circumstances, would Mandela have seen circumstances under a constitutional democracy where you break the law and you enter a new phase of things?
I'm trying to think of possible circumstances where it would. I know his point of departure, I say I know his, I worked very closely with Oliver Tambo, would be, we fought hard for our democracy. We fought for rights. We've got one of the most advanced constitutions in the world. We have space. Maybe people don't listen to what you're asking, but you can respond in other ways through democratic means. You would know as well as anybody, one of our most horrendous post-apartheid periods was during HIV/AIDS denial. And you didn't break the law, you used the law, and brilliantly. And it was organizing people on the ground living with HIV, huge numbers. It was using the media, the freedom of expression, and using the law. And with very well focused and thoughtful, with spectacular results. So for me, that's the model. Maybe also because the law was so wicked in the old days, and the democracy we've got, for me, it's just so brilliant. It's the one thing that's good in South Africa, is the openness of our society, and the ability to expose, to denounce, to mobilize, to generate complaints and so on. So I would be very reluctant. And I know our leaders, in a sense, were not natural lawbreakers. They were mostly the goody-goodies. And when you couldn't even be a goody-goody in society so wicked, then they kind of reluctantly, Albert Luthuli never accepted armed struggle. He was a pacifist. But he said, I'm a leader of the war organization, our people want it, I'm not going to stand in the way. And it was very delicate for Oliver Tambo to speak to him and say, we have to go that way. And it would have been, if they hadn't had MK under political control, it would have been just random anti-civilian violence with catastrophic results. So I don't feel South Africa systemically is in a situation where people can't gain their rights and advance their claims, except through defying the law. And even then, when we went into armed struggle, it wasn't just after armed struggle, anything goes. Very strong discipline, attacking physical targets, not attacking people. The only people who could be attacked would be soldiers and police. When I came out of hospital after being blown up, and it was Jacob Zuma and John Kadimeng who was sent by the ANC to see how I was getting on. And I told them the story. I'll share it with you. It belongs in a way to that phase. In Maputo, April the 7th, the day of the Mozambican women, public holiday, and I'm going to the beach in the morning, meeting in the afternoon. Wow, something terrible is happening. And I hear a voice saying, Albie, this is Ivo Garrido speaking. You're in Maputo Central Hospital. Your arm is in lamentable condition. You must face the future with courage. And I said into the darkness what happened, and a woman's voice said it was a car bomb. And I fainted, but into joy. You're a freedom fighter. Will they come for me today? If they come, will I be brave? Will I get through? They come for me and I got through. I'd survived. And then quiet, calm, and I'm lying on my back. And I'm feeling very light. And I tell myself a joke about Ali Khan, like me as a Jew, falls off a bus, and he does what looks like the sign of a cross, and someone said, honey, I didn't know you're Catholic. What do you mean Catholic? Spectacles, testicles, wallet and watch. And I start with testicles, and again, this Wolfie Kodesh in the hospital was saying, what was that joke again? He's writing it down and he sent it to the camps. And I've tried all my life to be macho and I failed, but for 15 minutes, I was a macho hero. The first thing Comic Albie did was reach for his balls. In order, my heart's in order. Spectacles, there's a crater, but no brain damage. I've lost an arm. I've only lost an arm. And I had a total conviction as I got better, my country would get better, just like a total conviction. Somebody says that's the sign of an optimist. I've only lost an arm. And then I'm telling the story to Kadimeng and to Zuma, and Zuma is roaring with laughter. That was when his laughter was hearty and people loved it because it was generous. And I say to myself, this is how we're going to get South Africa. My Jewish joke and the Zulu sense of humor. We come together, we bring in what we've got. We don't discard who we are, we come in as we are. But Nkadimeng didn't laugh. He lost his son to a bomb. He didn't laugh. Any event, I'll say, there's a question that's playing on my mind. I've read in the newspaper that the ANC is abandoning its policy of not attacking civilian targets. Is that so? And I'm terrified to get that answer. And Zuma now stopped laughing and answered very seriously. He said, we discussed the issue at the NEC and we reaffirmed our traditional position. No attacks on the civilian targets. Sure, it was a huge kind of relief. So it's simply to say it's not can you or can't you, even if you can, there might be forms of protest, bylaws, some commensurate thing that's not challenging the first democratically elected state and government, other than through democratic means. That is something that might not be permissible. But don't quote the Judge Albie Sachs saying that's how you can break the law.
I don't think there are any further questions. There's a comment online. I don't see any hands online. But the one comment is from Sean Gould, who says, thank you for the seminar. Valuable insights for leadership, despite the very different context we find ourselves in. I know there's another burning hand, Albie, so I don't know if you're happy for us to take that. But just give me one moment. I want to see if there's anybody who has not had a chance to speak. And then we can. No hands? No? Yes.
Me again. Just before this, I was actually having a long conversation with other queer people about the kind of LGBTI movement on the continent and the kind of very regressive backlash that we've seen by a lot of governments. And I was expressing a lot of deep concern in terms of how our own government has failed to kind of be exemplary as we have been on this fight. And I wanted to put it to you to find out how you think we can push our governments to take that fight forth much more seriously. Like we have seen our state do with the Palestine, Israel. You know, we've been exemplary in standing up against that. But when it comes to the LGBTI rights on the continent, which are rising at an increasing rate, we are not hearing or seeing anything from our government.
Yes, so let me postpone my answer. I'm having 2 more shots, and I'll have to be clever to postpone it the next time. It'll be difficult in my last shot to postpone answering that question. So I won't comment, except to say one thing that for me I think is relevant right now. Maybe the first duty of any government, the first duty is if it loses elections to step down. And so far, the ANC has accepted electoral results. And that's huge for Africa. And it's been supported by the Constitutional Court. It's supported by the people generally in that regard. Maybe that's the biggest gift the Mandela generation gave to South Africa, was a constitution which has been accepted by those exercising power under that constitution and accepting the necessity to step down from these. When ANC lost in Port Elizabeth, PE, maybe the most fierce resistance to apartheid, and the most fierce repression. I think some of the problems afterwards were because the apartheid regime cracked down with such ferocity in that area. But to imagine not having ANC. Pretoria. Johannesburg, unbelievable. With Soweto, but they stepped down. And it was Jacob Zuma who was on the platform at the IEC who said we accept the results. And just to intensify the South Africanity of the moment, there were 3 or 4 African women, young women, with signs saying, remember Shesi. And they were moved out. They didn't have their heads cut off. They weren't thrown into jail. Freedom of speech ran. So these are, for me, very central elements. They're not everything, but they're pretty fundamental. I think that's because for all the confusions in South Africa, a constitution with sometimes not all that much constitutionalism, for me it's unthinkable that Cyril will try to do Donald Trump. To me, it's completely unthinkable. And that's because the South African nation, in that sense, demands that the results of the elections be honestly and appropriate.
So I want to check what time I'll be, it's almost 3 o'clock. Seeing 2 hands pop up. And I think there's a comment which I can't see on the screen, so somebody may just read that.
Okay.
Are you just holding, are you fine for us to do those 2 more comments on it? You fine?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, so maybe read the comment first.
It is a comment someone doing from Nigeria, Yemi. And Yemi says, he listening from Nigeria, and I was very interested in your answer about acceptable actions of breaking the law when legal ways of protest, petitions, etc. are getting no responses. And then just to jump to the end, he's not sure if you gave example of what will be acceptable law breaking in this season as we see African democratic leaders disobey the law.
I think that's a great question. And I've managed to jump answering it up to now. So give me until my next presentation. Maybe I'll forget about the story.
It was just Nimrod and at the back then.
Yeah, so many ideas passing through my head, and it's almost like I want to, raise a couple of things. I mean, one is the histories from the past. No, I'm saying the lessons that we can learn from the past and what bearing they have on the present, and also this kind of schizophrenic sense of where we are as a country now. So, we have so much to celebrate in terms of the constitution, the democratic order, establishment of socio-economic rights. Yet, side by side with that, we have an administration that has patently failed the population, and kind of economic policy that hasn't delivered widespread gains. And how do we reconcile those two, and what lessons might we take from Madiba about how to do so?
Either the next session or the last session.
Yes.
So I get the sense, is that what you don't mind, I think we're going to have follow-up sessions.
Yeah.
So I know this has given us food for thought and we're hungry to ask questions, but come back next time. And we will make sure that we start with those questions first for Albie to answer. Faisal, I'm going to hand over you to.
Well, all I can say is we're really privileged to have you today. And I'd like all of us to just express how much we've really enjoyed you being here today. And thank you so much for making the time. I know when we went to see Albie a few weeks ago, we thought, he will say, yes, I don't have much to do these days. But instead he pulled out his diary and we saw that he's got a full schedule of work. And so he really is making time. And we really value that in the Nelson Mandela School. We are here to also learn, but pass on the messages and the insights and the historical lessons to the next generation.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone. We look forward to the next two sessions.
Yes.
So there's still to come. Think about all the questions you still want to ask Albie. There'll be two other opportunities at least to do that. So thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thanks to you online as well.
Should we do? Something you'd like to say.